Touch the alarm, and I choose a student. Garrick's voice cut through the classroom before anyone had time to understand why the door had locked behind him. 30 students froze beneath the soft blue lights of Helix University, staring at the pulse carbine held across his armored chest. Professor Helen Marrow lowered her hand from the emergency panel. Lyra Venn stood beside her desk, her silver-blue skin losing its usual glow. "Everyone on the floor," Garrick ordered. Chairs scraped. Books fell. A dozen species reacted in a dozen different ways, but fear translated perfectly. Caleb Walker stayed in his seat. His right hand rested beside a cheap black pen. His left remained on his knee. His heart was pounding so hard, he could feel it in his teeth. He loosened his jaw, drew one slow breath through his nose, and looked past the weapon instead of at it. Garrick favored his left leg. Dust clung to one boot from the maintenance corridor. The charge indicator on the carbine pulsed green, then dimmed for half a second. Behind Garrick, the dark classroom window reflected the locked door and 12 feet of open floor. "Caleb," Lyra whispered. "Get down." He placed the pen flat on the desk. "Not yet." Her amber eyes widened. She had spent 3 weeks teasing him about always sitting near an exit. Now she looked at him as though he had finally proven every ugly thing the galaxy believed about Deathworlders. Garrick noticed him. His head tilted slightly, the way a predator studied something that had failed to run. "You think you are brave, human?" Caleb said nothing. He counted the distance between Garrick and Lyra. 9 feet. Too far. He counted the time between the carbine's charge pulses. 2 seconds. Maybe 3 after a full discharge. Still not enough. Professor Marrow stepped forward carefully. "Garrick, these students have nothing to do with what happened to you." "They have everything to do with it," he snapped. "This school teaches the galaxy that Helix is safe, that its leaders are honorable. Today they tell the truth." He pointed the weapon toward the ceiling, not firing, only making sure everyone followed the movement. Caleb watched Garrick's trigger hand. Controlled. Deliberate. This was not blind rage. That made him more dangerous, not less. "Dean Vey is already being contacted," Marrow said. "Then he will confess publicly." Garrick's gaze swept across the room and stopped on Lyra's diplomatic insignia. Recognition sharpened his expression. He crossed the aisle and reached for her shoulder. Caleb's stomach tightened. Every instinct told him to move. His legs were ready. His hands were ready. Fear screamed that waiting was cowardice. Training, experience, and common sense told him that moving too early would make Lyra pay for his mistake. Garrick pulled her into the open. "Stand up, Deathworlder." Caleb met Lyra's eyes. She was terrified, but listening. "Good." He looked at the carbine again. "Full charge." "Bad." "You do not want me standing," Caleb said. Garrick gave a low laugh. That sounded almost like a threat. It was advice. Somewhere beyond the locked door, heavy footsteps entered the hallway. Garrick heard them too. His grip tightened. The green light on the weapon burned steadily. Caleb stayed seated, breathing slowly while the entire room mistook stillness for surrender. He was not frozen. He was waiting for 3 seconds. 3 weeks earlier, Caleb Walker had walked into Helix University carrying one duffel bag, a paper cup of coffee, and the uncomfortable feeling that everyone already knew what he was before he spoke. The campus floated above the pale clouds of ardent prime, all glass walkways, silver towers, and quiet gardens designed for species that considered raised voices a public disturbance. Caleb had grown up in Montana, where weather could turn mean in 10 minutes, and every family kept emergency supplies in the truck. Helix felt beautiful. It also felt like a place that had forgotten bad things could happen indoors. In Professor Helen Marrow's class, 29 alien students watched him take the seat closest to the rear exit. Lyra Venn sat beside him, her silver-blue skin catching the classroom light. "You know that door only opens during scheduled breaks," she said. "I know. Then why sit there?" Caleb set his coffee down. "Habit." Lyra smiled. "Deathworld habit. Montana habit." Professor Marrow began the lecture by displaying an image of Earth rotating above the room. "Today we are discussing environmental stress and adaptive behavior. Mr. Walker has agreed to answer reasonable questions." Every hand rose. One student wanted to know why humans consumed caffeine. Another asked whether football was ceremonial combat. A small avian student asked if bears actually entered human homes. "Sometimes," Caleb said. The room went silent. "And you remain in those homes?" "Usually the bear leaves first." The class laughed, including Caleb. He knew they did not mean harm. To them, Earth was a collection of impossible stories told for entertainment. Dean Orlon Vey entered halfway through the session, dressed in formal white robes with the polished smile of a man who expected applause. Mr. Walker represents the success of cultural refinement, he announced. Even species shaped by extreme environments can learn to trust civilized systems. Caleb looked at Professor Marrow. Her expression tightened for half a second. Vey continued speaking about safety, progress, and Helix becoming the first university to host human students without armed security. After class, Caleb stopped beneath the main corridor camera. Its lens faced 6 feet too far left, leaving the service door outside Marrow's classroom uncovered. He found a maintenance panel with fresh scratches around the lock. Something wrong? Lyra asked. Maybe. He crouched and touched the dust near the panel. One clear boot print crossed the floor, heavier than the shoes worn by campus technicians. You inspect hallways for fun? Only expensive hallways. He reported it to campus security. The officer barely glanced at the image Caleb had taken. The system performs automated diagnostics every hour. Machines can report that they are working while looking the wrong direction. The officer gave him a patient smile. Helix has not experienced a violent security incident in 87 years. That afternoon, Caleb received a message from Dean Vey reminding him that hypervigilance could make other students uncomfortable. He read it twice, then looked through the cafeteria window toward the academic wing. A figure in a gray service uniform stood near Marrow's classroom, studying the schedule panel. No equipment card, no identification badge, military-style boots. The figure turned and disappeared through the unmonitored service door. Caleb set down his untouched lunch and started walking. Caleb crossed the cafeteria in less than a minute, keeping the gray uniform in sight through the glass walls. The figure moved quickly but not nervously, turning corners without checking signs, as if he already knew the building. Caleb followed at a distance, passing students carrying lunch trays and faculty members arguing about research grants. Nothing around him looked dangerous. That bothered him more. The service door beside Professor Marrow's classroom was closing when he reached the hallway. Caleb caught it with his shoe and stepped into a narrow maintenance passage lit by yellow strips along the floor. The air smelled like dust and hot wiring. 50 feet ahead, the stranger stopped at an access panel. Caleb stayed behind a support column and watched him remove the cover without using a tool. The man connected a thin black device, waited for one light to flash, then slipped it into his pocket. The hallway cameras went dark. Caleb took out his phone and snapped a picture. The shutter sound was disabled, but the stranger still turned. For 1 second, Caleb saw a broad face marked by an old scar and eyes that measured distance instead of people. Then the man walked away. He did not run. Caleb followed until the passage split 3 ways. By the time he reached the intersection, the corridor was empty. Great, Caleb muttered. That is not suspicious at all. He returned to the security desk and showed the officer the photo. The officer studied it, then glanced toward his supervisor. This could be a contractor. Then check the contractor list. Mr. Walker, you are not authorized to conduct surveillance on university personnel. I took a picture of someone disabling your cameras. You believe he disabled them. Caleb looked at the monitor behind the desk. For camera feeds, showed frozen timestamps. Those all stopped at the same second. The officer finally turned around. His confident expression faded, but only briefly. A software update may be responsible. Dean Vey appeared before Caleb could answer. Is there another problem? Someone accessed the service network outside Professor Marrow's room. Vey examined the image without touching the phone. And you pursued him alone? I followed him. That behavior is exactly what concerns me. Vey lowered his voice. You were invited here to learn from a peaceful society, not to import Earth paranoia into it. Caleb felt heat rise in his face. He wanted to tell Vey that peace was not the same as preparation. Instead, he locked his phone and stepped back. Check the logs. Security will handle it. That evening, Caleb found Professor Marrow in her office. She listened without interrupting, then closed the door. The man in your picture is Garrick Sorn, she said. Former campus security. Former. He was dismissed last year after accusing the administration of covering up a training accident. Was he lying? Marrow looked toward the hallway before answering. I do not know. Caleb did not believe her. You recognized him immediately. Recognition is not proof. Neither is 87 quiet years. Marrow sighed. I will speak to Vey. He already thinks I am the problem. Then let him think it. The next morning, Caleb changed seats. He chose the rear corner of Marrow's classroom, where he could see the main door, the service entrance, and the reflection in the windows. Lyra dropped into the chair beside him. Still hunting shadows? Just learning the room. She shook her head, smiling. Not every dark corner has a predator in it. Caleb looked at the newly repaired camera above the door. Its green status light blinked once, then went dark again. No, he said. But this one has a pattern. The green light above the classroom door went dark for the second time, and this time Caleb stood before anyone noticed. Professor Marrow had just begun the morning lecture when he crossed the back of the room and pressed the manual release. Nothing happened. Professor, he said quietly, the door is locked from the outside. Lyra turned in her seat. Is that normal? No, Marrow answered. A sharp metallic sound echoed from the hallway, followed by the sudden silence of the ventilation system. The classroom lights shifted from white to emergency blue. Several students laughed nervously, expecting an equipment failure. Caleb did not. He moved to the side of the door instead of standing in front of it. Everyone away from the entrance. Dean Vey appeared on the wall display, his image breaking through a field of static. Remain calm. Campus security is addressing a minor technical problem. Caleb looked at the frozen camera feed behind Vey. Ask him why the service corridor is offline. Marrow stepped closer to the screen. Dean Vey, is Garrick Sorn on campus? Vey hesitated. It lasted less than a second, but Caleb saw it. There is no reason to alarm the students. A heavy impact shook the door. The class fell silent. That was not a technical problem, Lyra said. The second impact bent the locking plate inward. Caleb grabbed a wheeled demonstration table and pushed it across the tile. Help me. Lyra joined him first. Professor Marrow followed, then several students who had spent weeks joking about human survival instincts. They braced the table against the door as a third strike rattled the frame. This will not hold, Marrow said. It does not have to hold forever. Caleb scanned the room. 2 exits, both electronically sealed. Reinforced windows. Fire suppression controls near the ceiling. 30 frightened people with no training and nowhere to go. He pointed toward the far wall. Move the desks into 2 rows. Keep the center clear. Nobody crowds the corners. An avian student stared at him. Why? Because panic needs room to spread. Do not give it any. The wall display flickered again. Dean Vey was gone. A different face filled the screen. Garrick Sorn looked older than in Caleb's photograph, his scar pale beneath the emergency lighting. Professor Marrow, he said, you are going to help me tell the truth. Marrow stepped forward. Not through my students. Your students are the only reason Vey will listen. Caleb watched Garrick's eyes move across the room through the hijacked camera. He was checking positions, counting people, studying reactions. He can see us, Caleb said. Garrick's gaze stopped on him. The human. His tone carried recognition. You followed me. You wanted to be noticed. Garrick smiled without warmth. Good. Then you understand what happens next. The classroom door released with a soft click. The table began to roll backward as pressure pushed from the other side. Caleb planted his shoulder against it. Everybody move now. Students rushed toward the far wall while Marrow guided the slower species behind the lab stations. Lyra remained beside Caleb. I am not leaving you here. You are moving 10 feet back. That is not leaving. Close enough. The door opened 3 inches. A dark armored hand appeared through the gap and shoved. Caleb and Lyra lost ground. The wheels screeched across the floor. Lyra, Caleb said, when I say now, pull the yellow lever beside the fire panel. What does it do? I am hoping something inconvenient. The gap widened. Garrick's pulse carbine came into view first. Caleb waited until the barrel crossed the threshold. Now, Lyra pulled the lever. Fire shutters dropped from the ceiling with a thunderous crash, striking the demonstration table and forcing it sideways. A cloud of harmless suppression foam flooded the doorway, covering the floor and Garrick's visor. Caleb grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her clear as Garrick stepped into the room, moving carefully but without hesitation. The students went silent. Garrick wiped the foam from his faceplate, raised the carbine, and locked the door behind him. Everyone on the floor, he ordered. Caleb returned to his chair in the rear corner and sat down. Garrick noticed. So did everyone else. Garrick stepped farther into the room, the pulse carbine steady against his shoulder. On the floor, he repeated. This time, everyone obeyed. Caleb stayed seated, not because he felt brave, but because standing would make him the biggest target in the room. His heart hammered against his ribs. He kept his breathing slow and watched Garrick move. Left leg stiff, right hand controlled, trigger finger outside the guard unless someone spoke. That mattered. You, Garrick said, pointing toward Professor Marrow. Activate the broadcast system. Marrow did not move. These students have nothing to do with Vey. They are the only reason he will listen. Garrick crossed to the front console and entered a security code from memory. The wall display flickered to life. Dean Vey appeared from an office somewhere across campus, flanked by 2 security officers. Garrick, Vey said, forcing calm into his voice. Release the students, and we can discuss your concerns. Garrick gave a short laugh. Concerns? You buried 2 deaths under a maintenance report. A murmur moved through the classroom. Lyra looked toward Caleb, confused. Caleb kept his eyes on Garrick. Names, Caleb said. Garrick turned. What? The people who died. Say their names. Professor Marrow's expression changed. She understood what Caleb was doing. Garrick wanted an audience. Caleb was giving him one, but on terms that kept him talking. Officer Mara Pell, Garrick said. Officer Davin Rowe. What happened to them? Dean Vey leaned toward the screen. Do not engage him, Mr. Walker. Caleb ignored him. Garrick's attention narrowed. Their protective field failed during a training exercise. The equipment had been recalled, but Vey delayed replacement to protect the quarterly budget. That is a lie, Vey said. Garrick pulled a data drive from his armor. Then opened the files. Caleb saw Lyra shift closer to the floor terminal beneath her desk. Smart. The terminal could copy the broadcast stream if she reached it without drawing attention. He glanced at her, then at the terminal, then back to Garrick. Lyra followed his eyes. She moved one hand an inch. Garrick continued speaking, listing dates, repair orders, and warning reports. Caleb asked short questions whenever his voice began to rise. Every answer kept the weapon pointed away from the students for another few seconds. You came here to be heard, Caleb said. Not to hurt anyone. Do not tell me why I came. Then prove me wrong. Garrick stared at him. For a moment, the room felt balanced on that silence. Then Dean Vey spoke through the display. Security teams are standing down. Caleb looked at the reflection in the classroom window. 3 dark shapes moved into the hallway outside. Vey was lying. Garrick did not see them. Lyra did. Her eyes widened, but she kept her face still. Caleb gave the smallest shake of his head. Do not react. The terminal beneath her desk flashed green. Copy complete. Garrick noticed the light. His gaze dropped to Lyra's hand, then snapped to the window reflection. He saw the approaching security team. The calm vanished from his face. He seized Lyra by the arm and pulled her upright, placing her between himself and the door. You stalled me, he said to Caleb. No, Caleb answered, still seated. Vey did. On the wall display, Dean Vey raised one hand. The security officers beside him received an order Caleb could not hear. In the hallway, the 3 shadows spread out. Garrick lifted the carbine toward Lyra. The charge indicator burned bright green. Stand up, Deathworlder. Caleb met Lyra's terrified eyes and placed one hand flat on the desk. You do not want me standing. Garrick smiled. That sounded like a threat. It was advice. Then the first heavy steps sounded outside the door, and Dean Vey quietly gave the command that turned a hostage crisis into a countdown. Dean Vey lowered his hand, and the classroom door shuttered under a controlled breach from the hallway. Garrick reacted before the sound finished. He pulled Lyra closer, turned the carbine toward the entrance, and fired one warning pulse into the floor. The blast left a smoking mark across the tile, but struck no one. The weapon indicator dropped from green to yellow. Caleb saw it. 3 seconds. Garrick shifted his weight onto his right leg, protecting the injured left knee. Caleb saw that too. Security is coming through, Professor Marrow said. Tell them to stop. They are not listening to me, Garrick answered. His voice was still controlled, but the control had cracks in it now. On the wall display, Dean Vey stepped away from the camera as if distance could erase responsibility. Contain the situation, he told someone off-screen. Protect the institution. Caleb heard the words clearly. Garrick did too. There, Garrick said, looking at the display. You wanted proof. The door buckled inward another inch. Lyra stood rigid in front of him, one hand still near the terminal where she had copied the files. Caleb kept his eyes on the carbine light. Yellow. Garrick, he said. Vay wants this room to end badly. Be quiet. He needs you to look guilty and unstable. He needs witnesses who cannot talk. Garrick's jaw tightened. For a second, the weapon lowered. Then the outer door alarm began to scream. The security team had armed the magnetic ram. Garrick looked toward the sound, and Lyra moved. She drove her heel down on his boot and twisted free just enough to break his grip. Garrick caught her sleeve and pulled her back. His finger moved inside the trigger guard. Caleb kicked the front leg of his desk. The heavy table slid across the floor and struck the base of a lab station, knocking a metal case into the aisle. Garrick turned toward the noise and fired. The pulse hit the case, throwing bright sparks across the room. No one was touched. The charge indicator flashed red. Caleb stood. He crossed the 9 feet before Garrick understood why the human had waited. Caleb shoved the lab table between Lyra and the weapon, grabbed the emergency foam canister from the wall, and emptied it across Garrick's visor. Garrick stumbled backward, wiping at the opaque coating. Caleb pulled Lyra behind the table. Stay low. I copied everything, she said. Good. Keep it. Garrick swung the carbine toward Caleb, but the weapon clicked uselessly while its chamber reset. Caleb caught the barrel with both hands and forced it toward the ceiling. Garrick was stronger, much stronger. Caleb felt his shoes slide across the foam-covered floor. Garrick drove forward, using his height and armor to push Caleb toward the wall. Caleb released one hand, struck the emergency release on the demonstration table, and let its wheels unlock. The table rolled sideways beneath Garrick's weight. His damaged knee folded. He dropped to one side, still gripping the weapon. Caleb twisted the carbine free and sent it skidding beneath the front row of seats. The classroom door burst open. Security officers rushed in with shields raised. Down, one of them shouted. Garrick reached inside his armor. Caleb expected another weapon. Instead, Garrick pulled out the black data drive and held it high. This is why Vay wants me dead. Dean Vay's voice came through every speaker in the room. Officer Sorn is attempting to activate an explosive device. Neutralize him immediately. Garrick froze. The drive was not a weapon, but the officers could not know that. Caleb stepped between Garrick and the security line. That is evidence, he said. Move aside, Mr. Walker, the lead officer ordered. Caleb did not move. Behind him, Garrick stared at the human who had just taken away his weapon and was now protecting his right to surrender. On the wall display, Dean Vay leaned toward the camera. Fire before he uploads it. Lyra raised her personal terminal from behind the overturned table. Too late, she said. I already did. Every screen in the classroom changed at once, replacing Vay's face with 2 sealed accident reports, 3 falsified repair orders, and 1 authorization bearing his signature. The security officers stopped advancing. Garrick slowly placed the data drive on the floor. Then the lights went out, the door locked behind the security team, and Dean Vay cut the entire classroom off from the campus network. The darkness lasted less than a second, but it was enough to change the room. Emergency lights came on in thin red strips along the floor. The wall screens went black. The classroom door remained sealed, and the security officers suddenly found themselves trapped inside with the same people they had been ordered to rescue. Campus control is gone, the lead officer said, checking his wrist display. No network. No external command. Professor Marrow looked toward the ceiling speakers. Vay is isolating us. Garrick stayed on one knee near the data drive, both hands visible. Caleb stood between him and the security line, breathing hard but steady. Nobody makes a fast decision, Caleb said. The lead officer turned toward him. You are a student. Today has been disappointing for job descriptions. Lyra almost laughed, but the sound died when the ventilation system stopped. A low mechanical tone began pulsing through the room. Professor Marrow recognized it first. Environmental lockdown. The temperature display dropped 3 degrees. Garrick looked toward the lab wall. He is purging the room. Purging what? Lyra asked. Evidence, Garrick said. The security officers exchanged uneasy looks. One of them tried the manual door release. It flashed red. Caleb moved to the emergency panel and removed the plastic cover. How long before this becomes a problem? For humans, maybe 20 minutes, Marrow said. For some of the students, 5. That changed the room immediately. Several smaller species began breathing faster. Caleb pointed to the floor. Everyone stays low and close together. No running. No shouting. Save your air. Garik pushed himself upright, favoring his left leg. The officers raised their weapons again. Easy, Caleb said. Garik ignored them and limped toward the front console. There is a maintenance bypass behind this wall. You know that because you broke in through it, Lyra said. Yes. Comforting. Garik removed a narrow panel and reached inside. Nothing happened. They disabled the local controls. Caleb looked across the room, remembering the layout he had studied. The fire shutters. The service passage. The old mechanical release above the demonstration area. The emergency shutters are independent, he said. If we lift the west shutter, it opens into the service corridor. That shutter weighs 600 pounds, the lead officer replied. Then we do not lift all of it. Caleb directed the students to clear a path, while the officers moved 2 lab tables beneath the shutter. Garik found a manual crank inside the wall, but the handle had been removed. Lyra held up the metal support rod from a broken display stand. Will this work? Caleb took it. It is about to get a promotion. He fitted the rod into the crank housing and leaned into it. The mechanism resisted. Garik stepped beside him and added his strength without a word. The shutter rose 1 inch, then 2. Cold air rushed through the gap from the service corridor. The students nearest the floor took deeper breaths. Keep going, Marrow said. The rod began to bend. Caleb's hand slipped, and the shutter dropped 1/2 inch. Garik caught the crank housing before it snapped back. For the first time, they worked together without either pretending to trust the other. On 3, Caleb said. 1, 2, 3. The shutter climbed high enough for the smallest students to crawl under. Lyra organized them by size, sending the most vulnerable first. The lead officer stared at Garik. Why are you helping? Garik kept turning the makeshift crank. Because Vey was wrong about me. He glanced at Caleb. I would prefer not to prove him right. Half the class had escaped when the ceiling speakers crackled back to life. Dean Vey's voice filled the room, calm and polished. Security breach confirmed. The individual identified as Garik Sorn has taken control of the environmental system. Every officer's wrist display lit up with the same false alert. Caleb looked at Garik, then at the officers. He is rewriting the story while we are still inside it. A second warning appeared beneath the first. Automatic containment units were approaching from both ends of the service corridor. Lyra checked the copied files on her terminal. Vey is not trying to lock us in anymore. She looked through the gap beneath the shutter as heavy mechanical footsteps echoed closer. He is trying to make sure nobody leaves with proof. The containment units entered the service corridor from both directions, their white shells marked with the Helix security seal. They were not combat machines. They were built to seal hazardous areas, close exits, and remove unauthorized personnel. That made them perfect for Vey. No questions. No witnesses. They will close the corridor in 30 seconds, Garik said. Caleb looked at the students still waiting beneath the raised shutter. 12 had escaped. 18 remained, including 2 species already struggling with the thinning air. Can they be stopped? Lyra asked. Not from here, the lead officer said. Their orders come through the administrative network. Caleb turned to her terminal. You copied Vey's files. Can you reach the campus broadcast? The network is blocked. The public emergency channel is not. Professor Marrow caught on immediately. Every classroom has an independent disaster transmitter. Lyra opened the emergency menu, but the screen demanded authorization from a faculty member and campus security. Marrow placed her hand on the scanner. The lead officer added his badge. The terminal still refused access. A third authorization field appeared. Administrative command. Vey designed it so nothing leaves without him, Lyra said. Garik stopped turning the crank and reached into his armor. The officers tensed, but he only removed an old security token. I helped build the first version of this system. He pressed the token against the terminal. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the emergency channel opened. Lyra uploaded the accident reports, repair orders, classroom recording, and Vey's command to seal the building. Send it everywhere, Caleb said. News networks, council offices, student devices. That will expose private campus records, the lead officer warned. Lyra looked at the trapped students. I can live with the disciplinary hearing. She pressed transmit. Across Helix University, every public display changed. Dean Vei's polished emergency announcement vanished, replaced by his signature approving unsafe equipment, his order to attack the classroom, and the recording of him demanding Garrick be stopped before the evidence uploaded. The containment units slowed. Their status lights shifted from red to amber as thousands of external devices challenged the administrative order at once. He has lost exclusive control, Marrow said. Caleb did not celebrate. Then move. The remaining students crawled beneath the shutter. Lyra guided them into the service corridor while the security officers formed a protective line between the class and the machines. Garrick stayed at the crank, holding the gap open as the bent metal rod trembled under the weight. When the last student reached safety, the rod slipped. Caleb grabbed it before the shutter dropped. Garrick caught the other end. Together, they held it long enough for Professor Marrow to pass through. Your turn, Caleb told Garrick. Garrick looked down the corridor. Campus officers were approaching now, but their weapons were lowered. He could have run through the opposite passage. Instead, he placed the data drive in Caleb's hand. Mara Pell and Davin Rowe, he said. Do not let Vei turn them into numbers again. Then he stepped through the opening and raised his empty hands. The lead officer secured him without ceremony. No one called him innocent. No one pretended the hostage crisis had been justified. But no one allowed Vei to erase the reason it happened. The classroom door finally released behind them. Dean Vei stood at the far end of the main hallway with 2 administrators and a packed travel case at his feet. He had been trying to reach a private shuttle. Students lined the glass walkways above, holding up terminals that displayed his orders. Vei looked at Caleb as if the human had personally ruined civilization. You do not understand what you have done, he said. Caleb handed the data drive to the lead officer. That seems to be going around today. Vei reached toward his coat, and every security officer in the corridor turned toward him. He stopped. Lyra stepped beside Caleb, still holding the terminal that had sent the truth beyond Helix. The Galactic Council has acknowledged receipt, she said. Professor Marrow looked at Vei. So have the families. For the first time since Garrick entered the classroom, the building became completely quiet. Then the lead officer walked past Caleb, placed Dean Vei under arrest, and read the charges while the entire university listened. 3 weeks later, Caleb returned to Professor Marrow's classroom with a healing rib, a stiff shoulder, and a paper cup of coffee that tasted almost like the real thing. The damaged door had been replaced with one that included a manual lock. The cameras had independent power. Emergency controls were mounted where every student could reach them. No one called the changes excessive anymore. Lyra had saved him a seat near the rear exit. Still a habit? She asked. Caleb lowered himself carefully into the chair. Now it is school policy. She smiled, but her expression softened when she noticed the way he guarded his side. Garrick Sorn was awaiting trial. The charges against him were serious, and nobody tried to excuse what he had done. But the evidence he carried had cleared the names of Mara Pell and Davin Rowe. Their families received formal apologies, compensation, and the truth that Dean Vei had tried to bury. Vei had been removed from office and charged with falsifying records, endangering students, and interfering with an investigation. Helix had spent 87 years bragging that nothing terrible ever happened there. Now the university was learning that a perfect safety record could mean people were safe, or it could mean someone had become very skilled at hiding failure. Professor Marrow stood at the front of the room and waited for the last conversation to fade. Today's subject is fear, she said. A student near the window raised one hand. Professor, is it true that humans do not experience the freeze response? Every face turned toward Caleb. He looked down at his coffee. I was afraid the whole time. The student blinked. But you appeared calm. Those are not the same thing. Lyra leaned closer. Then why did you stay seated when Garrick ordered you to stand? The room became still. It was the question reporters had asked for weeks, and the one Caleb had refused to answer on camera. He looked at the repaired door, then at the faint marks still visible on the floor where the first pulse had struck. Because I did not know if I could stop him, he said. Standing up would have made me feel like I was doing something. That does not mean it would have helped. No one interrupted. Fear told me to move. Pride told me to prove I was not scared. But there were 30 people in this room, and none of them needed me to look brave. They needed me to pay attention. Lyra folded her hands on the desk. So you waited for the weapon to lose its charge. I waited for a chance that did not belong to me alone. Professor Marrow nodded slowly. And what did fear do for you? Caleb considered the question. It showed me what mattered. The door. His hands. Lyra. The students who could not breathe our air for long. Fear is useful when you give it a job. It becomes dangerous when you let it become the boss. After class, Caleb walked through the main hall with Lyra. A memorial plaque had been installed beneath the security office. It carried the names Mara Pell and Davin Rowe, along with a simple line approved by their families. The truth arrived late, but it arrived. Lyra stopped in front of it. On my world, courage means acting without hesitation. Caleb studied the names. On mine, hesitation can be courage too. Sometimes the hardest thing is waiting until your action helps someone besides yourself. Outside, the clouds below Helix turned gold in the afternoon light. Students crossed the glass walkways, talking, laughing, and checking the exits without embarrassment. The university had not become fearful. It had become honest. Caleb took a sip of his coffee and made a face. Lyra noticed. Still terrible? Some things survive every crisis. She laughed, and they continued toward class. Years later, people across the galaxy would tell the story as proof that humans were dangerous. They would remember the sealed room, the armed intruder, and the Deathworlder who refused to move. But the students who had been there understood something different. Caleb Walker had not saved them because he lacked fear. He saved them because he respected it, listened to it, and refused to let it choose for him. Strength was never the absence of fear. Sometimes strength was simply knowing when not to stand.